My fellow invaders, welcome to the Age of Reflection. This is a time where I shall be giving a closer eye to what makes my builds work, and how they can be more effective across the board. I felt for a little while now that many of my builds have fallen off in terms of effectiveness due to several of the most recent patches, but I'm also trying to do a better job of adapting them to the levels and ranges where they get the most invasions. Lately I've also been dwelling on a few questions, like what do I enjoy about the combat in these games? Specifically, whether or not I really enjoy the combat in Elden Ring, or do I really just like the invasion mechanic? And in order to fully explore that, I felt like we needed to go back to the series' roots. Not like all the way back, but the first game that really had an active and long-term community. It is finally time to return. So we are returning to Lordran. But why do we need to start with DS1? Why do we need to go that far back? The other day, someone linked me a video on quote-unquote Snape wives in an attempt to make me cringe, and initially I was intrigued. Upon clicking the link, I soon found that the video was 3 hours long on a phenomenon of women being really into a fictional character written by a transphobic young adult author. The 3-hour length really did deter me, but nonetheless I persevered because I appreciate a good video essay about something cringy. However, what really did me in was the fact that in order to examine the concept of, again, Snape wives, of all things, the author felt the need to start with ancient fucking Greece as a starting point. No thank you, I will not be starting with the birth of Western philosophy and democracy as a good base camp for scaling what I assume is the relatively small foothill that is the concept of Snape wives. That long and inane tangent was my way of saying I don't want to start at ancient Greece, or whatever the FromSoft equivalent is here, probably Kingsfield I guess. We're going back to Dark Souls 1 because to me, it's the first Souls game that had like a real long-term community of players. That's not to say that there aren't PS3 Demon Souls lifers out there, I'm sure there are, but the multi-platform aspect of Dark Souls 1, along with it being the first real breakout hit for FromSoft, makes it a really good starting point for examining the PvP of these games. It's also a matter of availability. I cannot find any players to invade on the privately run PS3 emulator servers in Demon Souls, and meanwhile this also coincides nicely with the Return to Lordran event I mentioned and hyped up a little bit in my last video. Dark Souls 1 also had a true passive poise system, which was essentially non-existent until it was reintroduced in Elden Ring a whole decade later. I think it's worth examining the genesis of passive poise and how that compares to its existence in Elden Ring. Actually, let's get that out of the way right now since the analysis is not that in-depth. I've made a whole video about why I don't like the poise in Elden Ring in the past, which I felt like was just kind of a vent video with not a ton of solid information, mostly just vibes. Subsequently, Gabri made a much better video going in depth on why poise doesn't work, so I'll link that on screen and in the description. But essentially, poise in Dark Souls 1 works because it's a dramatically slower game, and armoring up actually had some downsides. From the couple of weekends I spent playing DS1 PvP, it seems like it's a game really all about positioning rather than movement and spacing like it is in Dark Souls 3 and Elden Ring. And the weapons and armor of Dark Souls 1 all play a part in this positioning game. Wearing heavier armor slows your movement speed, trading off protection and poise for worse positioning. Wearing heavier armor in many cases reduces your stamina recovery, again, another trade-off that lowers your ability to position, but also has enormous benefits too. Wearing heavier armor also means that you are likely going to be mid-rolling instead of light-rolling in this game. I found that mid-rolling with a ton of poise is still quite effective and feasible, but again, it's a trade-off. And your weapons also play into this. With an attack on certain weapons and your recovery is dramatically increased, that puts you out of position and likely getting backstabbed. Hit someone with a weapon that doesn't stagger them or break their poise, you're getting backstabbed. The backstab becomes this punishment for putting yourself in a bad position, but having more poise also lets you position yourself easier by simply ignoring certain attacks. Meanwhile, in Elden Ring, there are zero downsides to armoring up. Your movement speed is the same as long as you are mid-rolling, but now you are unstoppable. You cannot be stunned unless hit with some extremely heavy or specific attacks. Sure, there are no longer poise backstabs, which are a big complaint of the Dark Souls 1 community or people who've played it, but now it's just poise chase downs. If there are two poised up players chasing you, there's very little you can do to stop them. In fact, the only reliable strategy is just to run away until they stop chasing you, and exactly what about that is fun? Watch any meta PvP players stream or videos, and half of it is them running away, and that's not because they're quote-unquote scared or cowards or whatever the gankers like to call them. It's because that's the only optimal strategy there. It took me a very long time to unlearn my habit of performing turn and burns against parties chasing me like I once did constantly in Dark Souls 3, and that's because turn and burns aren't safe to perform anymore, or at least nowhere near as safe as they once were. I've voiced these same complaints before, so I'll just cut it off here for now. If heavier equip loads cause slower movement speed in Elden Ring, that would actually be kind of a fair trade-off in PvP, but I think that would be very difficult to balance too with the changes in PvE. You'd have to consider which bosses have to be adjusted because you also have to account for people who are just going to be moving quite a bit more slowly. Imagine doing Elden Beast or Placiduous Axe, but moving at a greatly reduced speed. You would just get annihilated by a ton of regular attacks. It would make some boss fights insanely difficult and totally alter them, and increasing the timing windows on some of these boss fights might make them trivial to many other players who aren't armoring up. Altogether, it's a very difficult thing to balance, and I can see why they didn't alter movement speed outside of the difference between mid-rolling and light-rolling as the speed of their games got faster and faster. I think ultimately the solution here, though, would be to just not have passive poise. Reward players who armor up with higher defenses and higher absorptions, sure, maybe even give them hyper armor on more attacks, but they really don't need passive poise on top of all of those advantages as well. But hey, back to the important stuff. The Return to Lordran event was really fun, and I have a couple of thoughts I wanted to share after invading for a couple of weekends. So, first and foremost, it's genuinely very funny to me to play a game where I'm much better than the PvEers, but just terrible compared to the people who've been playing this game for quite a while. The invasions feel organic. I don't know if I'm going to be able to win or not, for once in my life. If you invaded me in Dark Souls 3, I'm pretty confident I'll win because I have several health advantages, and also I played that game for 6 fucking years. But getting invaded in the Return to Lordran is kind of this crapshoot, like, oh shit, am I getting someone else like me who only partially understands the mechanics of this game? Or am I getting a total Bambi? Or am I getting the guy who understands the exact angles that they need to take on me every single time to get a backstab, and is also buffed by 99 soft humanity that they currently have on them? Because I'm not going to beat that guy, and I'm not going to beat that guy like 9 times out of 10, or even like 10 times out of 10. I'm going to lose every single time to that guy. My biggest takeaway in terms of mechanics of this game was that Poise absolutely belongs in this game, and honestly so do the backstabs. Backstabs in this game are actually kind of fun. It makes all of your maneuvering so important, but also raises the tension of everything. Maneuvering goes from this passive run around in small circles event that you see very frequently in meta Dark Souls 3 duels, to this more West Side Story-esque knife fight over who's gonna stab who. I also totally understand why everyone hates the backstabs in this game. One second you think you're totally fine, and the next you're getting Hornet Ring backstabbed for 3/4 of your health. Or maybe half. A lot of the time it was half. But I was having a lot of fun with this. The trick is to just not take it that seriously. Everything in this game tries to kill you in some gimmicky way, especially in Dark Souls 1, and likewise so does the PvP. Someone asked me the other day if I was having fun with Dark Souls 1 PvP because it's genuinely fun, or just a change of pace from Elden Ring. And I think the answer is definitely a bit of both. I could never become a Dark Souls 1 lifer, mostly due to the inactivity of it being a 10-year-old game, but also because the speed of this game makes fighting multiple people that much harder. In Elden Ring, if you go up against a party of 3, sure, you can die very fast, but you can kill each of them pretty fast if you're able to properly isolate and outsmart your opponents. But in Dark Souls 1, if you go up against a party of 3 with just one of these people being even remotely familiar with PvP, you're just gonna get steamrolled, and it's very difficult to get out of that situation, mostly due to the slower pace of the combat. And probably the second biggest reason I'd never be a DS1 lifer at this point is that most of the invasions are solo host invasions. You'll have noticed watching this video thus far, but pretty much 90% of activity are solo host invasions, and I really forgot just how much solo host invasions bore the shit out of me. Because so many of them play out the exact same way. I know the mechanics, the host does not. The host makes an initial attempt to fight me, finds that they don't know much about the PvP mechanics of this game, and then attempts to run. I of course chase them down and do a sassy gesture over their corpse, rinse and repeat. What I just described also describes most of the solo host invasions I got in Dark Souls 3 as well. Sure, there was occasionally variability in like who puts on Way of the Blue and who was a bonfire duelist, but at the end of the day, it's just not that fun. As a rule of thumb, I think more invasions for everyone is a good thing, but I also think that only a small fraction of solo host invasions are fun for either party. I get why solo host invasions existed in the Dark Souls series, and they also kept those PvP scenes active for years and years after each game's launch, especially with the much smaller player base of each game compared to the juggernaut that is Elden Ring. But ultimately, I'm very okay if they decide to continue with what they've done with Elden Ring and move off of purely solo host invasions entirely in the future. The dream for me is to bring back solo host invasions, but have the blues enter the world first before the invader. Let the blue and the host sync up, and just like that, it becomes a co-op invasion, which is kind of what invaders want the most these days anyways. It would give blues more activity and make blues a bit less annoying so they don't spawn behind you while you're engaged in fighting a host. Do I think FromSoft will ever do something like that? Probably not, but a man can dream. Now, these are all the reasons I would never become a Dark Souls 1 lifer, but Dark Souls 1 does have some really great things going from it from the PvP side. It has some of the strongest RPG and character design freedom of any game I've ever played. It's incredibly satisfying to play as an armored up dude with a heavy shield and a heavy weapon and really feel that weight, and then make an entirely different build like a backflipping ninja and play the game in an almost entirely different way. It's a truly incredible game, and I hope someday they consider going back to this level of depth in player choice. There's also a few mechanics from Dark Souls 1 that I desperately miss. I miss the humanity system in this game so much. It has so many hidden properties and so much depth to it. I love that something that you get from killing other players is then used to boost your ability to kill other players. Like, I believe having more soft humanity on your player boosts your defenses. I've heard it caps out at like 10, but still, very cool system. And I know some people don't like that, they think that's unbalanced, but yeah, this game's kind of unbalanced. Like, all these games are pretty unbalanced. I wouldn't really mind something that maybe makes the game a little bit less balanced, but has a dynamic system to it. I love that if you want to invade, you have to be human. Like, no, you don't get to get out of invasions as the invader. Sure, the whole system is pretty obscure, which makes it less accessible, but there's ways you could make that system more accessible rather than just removing fun and mechanically deep features from future games entirely. I'd love to see a modern FromSoft who actually, puts in tutorial prompts to explain their mechanics, try to explain to players another Humanity-like system just because it has that much depth. Don't get me wrong, there's definitely some jank with Dark Souls 1's multiplayer systems in general. It's pretty annoying that when you die in an invasion, you go back to the most recent bonfire, which then forces you to do like this mini run back every time you die in an invasion depending on where you're invading. But still, invading to hunt for humanity just makes so much sense, and it's something that I feel all future games sort of lack. Yes, I appreciate that they tried to bring this back to a degree in Elden Ring, but it's just not the same, and I'll explain why. In Dark Souls 1, humanity is a truly precious commodity. It governs your ability to summon players, it governs how much Estus you can refill at bonfires, it governs your defense, and it all doubles as a Covenant reward. Dark Souls 3 had something similar to this for Embers, but it wasn't nearly as precious due to a lack of kindling at bonfires in that game, and the fact that each Covenant had their own reward that you could only earn by participating in their Covenant. Now in Elden Ring, rune arcs are valuable in that they can activate runes, but they don't carry that sense of importance and depth that humanity did. They also kind of totally lose their purpose after you collect like more than 20 or 30, which is kind of the exact same problem that Dark Souls 3 had with their Covenant rewards as well. Add that to the fact that Furl Calling Fingers were designed to be ubiquitous, and you just end up with a system that really lacks cohesiveness and value given to why you invade in the first place. And it's something I really want back in these games. I know I say this like every video at this point, but I liked Covenants. Covenants gave you a reason to invade either for gameplay purposes, but more importantly, at least for me, lore purposes. Dark Souls 1 really did that the best with the humanity system, and we haven't really seen anything like it since then. So yeah, don't have really too much else to cover in this video. Return to Lordran 2023 was really fun, and I can already tell you that I'm very much looking forward to it next year as well. Hell, I even have a build all planned and ready for it. I hope next year I can get the word out a little earlier and more of you can join me if you play on PC. I'd love to run into some of you every now and then in the land of lords. But for now, that's all from me guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.